Hello, and welcome to my class on death and the dying process. Now, this is one of my favorite classes that I've been able to create. And in its creation process, I literally sat down in bed and started writing down everything I knew about death and the dying process. And here are my notes, and I was just like, what do I know about death and dying process? And these are all the things I've learned in my studies of shamanism throughout the years. And once I collected all of my ideas onto paper, I thought to myself, well, what more can I learn about this phenomenon that we call death? How can I go a little bit deeper and expand my knowledge even further into this process that we call death? And so I gathered some resources, some books, and I did some research and a lot of reading, and I did some research online, and creating this class was a journey of really deep, intense emotions for me, because death is something that we all experience in our life, and it's something that touches deep within our being. And so this was a very cathartic class for me to create and to explore, and so I hope you guys enjoy the wisdom and knowledge that I'm about to share with you guys. So I think a good place to start is asking ourselves, what is death? Like, what is it? And it's something that we obviously all experience in life. It's something that we all have in common and that none of us can escape from. So we all must have some opinion on what death is and what it means to you. And it affects each and every one of us differently. So some of us may fear death, some of us may invite death into our space, into our being, and each and every one of us has a different relationship with death. So in my exploration, death is a state of transition. It can be described as an end of a state of being. And so there's tons of examples where we see death in our world and in our life. And I'm sure you can think of some. One very obvious one would be the dark half of the year, fall and winter, where nature tends to die, or the plants lose their leaves, some plants die, and life begins to come to a stopping point or a slowdown point. Even animals come to a near-death state in hibernation. And then once we return back into the light half of the year and spring arrives, everything comes back to life. The plants come back to life, the animals awaken from their hibernation, and so we see death as a natural part of the rhythms and cycles of our world, and of course of the cycle of life. And so modern material science tells us that we are a physical body, and in this physical body is a collection of body parts functioning together to give us life. One of which is our brain. And according to modern material science, this is where all of our consciousness is stored. And once the body dies, so does our brain, and so does our consciousness. However, all pre-industrial and ancient cultures have shared a very different perspective. They have this idea that existence is continuous, that we are all on a journey of the soul, and believed in the concepts of reincarnation and karma, which means the decisions that we make in one lifetime would have an effect on future lifetimes. They also believed in the unseen world, such as the land of the gods, the spirit world, the land of the ancestors, heaven, and different dimensions of reality. Another perspective that we can take is death is the absence of the physical self. Let's take a look at that. Death is the absence of the physical self. So physics tells us that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed. And like energy, life or life force energy or life energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. So if death is simply the loss of your physical form, what does death actually mean? And in order to fully understand, we need to take a look at our pre-physical existence, before we incarnated in this body and had life. So before we were born into this body, we were and still are a conscious being, a creation of life energy without physical form. This can be described as a body or a field of consciousness. It's an aspect of the whole universe. And we commonly call this body of consciousness the soul or the spirit. Now, Chinese philosophy would say our physical form is a material of the formless. And what we call life is an expanding state of awareness where we learn from and about the school of life. And this is the present state of awareness that we all currently reside. If you're watching this video course, then you are alive in a physical body and you're expanding your state of awareness. I mean, you're watching this program to learn something new. And so Chinese philosophy recognizes that physical form is just a material of the formless energy, and it's taking life as an experience to expand our awareness, our consciousness. And death is an evolving expression of this growth. So by the time we reach death, we have hopefully learned and experienced all that we set out to accomplish in our journey of the soul. So when we leave the body and we return it to the earth from which it was created, and we return home to our to our formless state of infinite being, this is the transition from life to death. So Chinese philosophy would say, life is a temporary experience for expanding our awareness, and death is an evolving expression of this growth. Because after you finish your experience of life, you've learned something new. You've had experiences you've never had before, and so now you're a completely different person with a different perspective because you have experiences and knowledge and wisdom that you didn't have prior to taking life. And so death is this evolving expression of growth. And so in essence, life is the emergence into physical awareness, which is temporarily experiencing separation from the infinite whole of oneness, or we can call that source, or God, or the universe. So life is an experience of physical awareness, and in this physical awareness, we are temporarily experiencing a separation from the oneness. We're not part of that formless source of life energy. We have come into this physical form to learn something, and this is a temporary experience. And so life is this temporary separation from God or from the universe, from Source. I mean, we're always connected, but it's a temporary experience to experiencing this separation in a way to experience life separate from existing. And therefore, death is the emergence back into universal and infinite awareness. Death is a transcendent state of being, returning back to our original form with more wisdom, knowledge, and experience than before our lifetime. So this can be observed as a literal life and death occurrence that only happens once in a lifetime through the cycle of life, which can be described as beginning as a non-physical, transcendent state of beingness, or an essence or expression of life force energy. And then this beingness, this essence, this expression is birthed into immanent presence in a physical state of existence on this physical plane, and we call this physical plane Earth. And then we return, once we die, we return to our transcendent non-physical state of being. So we're always in this cycle of a state of being and a state of beginning, which can also be observed as multiple occurrences throughout a lifetime. Not just one life and death, but there are many deaths throughout a lifetime. So think of some examples. What are some examples of a death that we may experience in a lifetime? It could be the death of a relationship. It could be a death of an old personality. It could be losing a job. It could be moving across country. There's so many different deaths that we experience in our lifetime. So as we begin to define and understand death, we really need to take a look at life to fully understand the essence of what death is. Now, life is existence in physical form. Even though it has existed before in its transcendent, eternal state of being, life is distinguished separate from that in a physical vessel. And we differentiate between life and existence as life being physically incarnate and alive. And when you're physically incarnate and alive, you're filled with potential energy and potentialities of free will to express and create with matter within this physical realm. So in essence, we are an artist that is collectively co-creating this masterpiece with matter, and we can define this as the human experience. So life is this accumulation of matter and information through emotional experiences. Life is created from two parts, an egg and a sperm, feminine energy and masculine energy. And from this tiny creation, a mass of matter is accumulated into a human being. And there we gather information from life experiences, and then death is the release of this matter, but not the release of information and experiences. So therefore, death of matter is not the absence of the self, it's not the absence of the being, but rather the continuation of information and experience of having lived, still contained within an individual field of consciousness. So, if we are eternal beings of consciousness, where is all this information stored? Because it's clearly not stored in the brain like modern material science would have us believe. So, in my research, there are different fields of consciousness. And by field, I'm really referring to kind of like an entangled web of consciousness or of experiences. And there's different fields or webs of consciousness and experiences. We have an individual field of consciousness, which is a field of information that is gathered from one individual's experiences. And as we interact with each other and interact with other fields of consciousness, we entangle our energies and our experiences, which create another field of consciousness, right? All those who have watched this class is in a field of consciousness that has gone through this experience and has learned all of these things that I've learned. And there are these various fields of consciousness. And another example would be a family conscious, right? So every family has its own conscience. I'll give you an example. There could be a poor family that needs to steal in order to survive, in order to live, and in order to feed itself. And there could be another family who says that stealing is bad. Well, this family needs to steal in order to survive. So for them, theft is not anything bad. It's a way of survival. And so their family conscience sees theft as part of survival. And we see this throughout the natural world, right? Like, we see animals stealing from each other all the time, whether they're stealing food or eggs or homes and habitats. We see this in the natural world, and us humans are the only ones that put a judgment on it as good or bad. And so there could be a family conscience that says theft is a way of life, and then there's another family who says theft is wrong, right? So there's different fields of consciousness of an entire family. Now we can expand that throughout space and time into an ancestral conscience, right? There's a conscience of our entire ancestral lineage that holds all the information of our entire ancestral being, our entire ancestral lineage, all of the experiences, all of the traumas, all of the triumphs, all of the wisdom. And so this is something that I'll go deeper in another class called Discovering Your Ancestral Blueprint. So as you can see, there's these different fields of consciousness. There's an even bigger field of consciousness, the human collective consciousness, right? Like, how is the entire human collective moving? There's an entire consciousness, and there's a variety of different perspectives, to say the least, within a human collective consciousness, right? There's people who believe one way, there's people who believe another way, and another way, but together it creates a collective consciousness. And this is all part of the universal consciousness, the source consciousness, the oneness, God. And so, as you can see, these experiences, this information that we collect while we're alive, doesn't die when we die. It's stored within a field of consciousness. And being alive, having a soul, means that we have our own individual field of consciousness. So being alive is simply to observe life itself. And in order to observe life, we must temporarily have an experience that is separate from this eternal beingness. Thus, we are born into this physical body, or a container, or a vessel. And this is individuated from the universe, but still a part of the universe. right? Let's take another example. Let's say you were in a particular situation and you're trying to understand what happened. You can't just look at the situation from your own perspective, from your own experience. If you had a situation with someone else, you need to see their perspective. How were they feeling? Where were they coming from? What was it like being on the receiving end? Or, you have to see all the different perspectives from a particular situation, what led up to the situation. So in order to observe something, you need to take a step away from that and become the observer. And that is what life is itself. It's an opportunity to observe life separate from this oneness, this beingness. And in this process of individuation, we are separated from this unlimited consciousness, but we still have access to it. And when we die, we return to the oneness, and still with our individual experiences, but without our individual form. We don't take the body with us. The body stays on earth because it came from the earth. And so it returns to the earth. But our soul returns back to the oneness with all of its experiences and lessons and information that we've gathered throughout our lifetime. And this is the meaning of the expression, you are a drop in the ocean and you are the entire ocean. Or we are the universe experiencing itself. It's because we are, right? We're an expression of the universe that has come into being in this physical plane to experience things in life. And then once we've finished those experiences that we set out to finish, to learn and to experience, then we return back to our original state of being with all of that information and experiences, and we call that transition death. And so death is this magical phenomenon that allows us to grow and to integrate and to learn from the experiences that we gathered in life. And to really get a deeper understanding of death, let's take a look at the centuries-old wisdom teachings of tarot, right? I mean, I love tarot. Who doesn't love tarot? I love getting tarot card readings or oracle card readings. It's fascinating. And tarot has been around for centuries, and it is woven with so much wisdom. So let's take a look at what tarot has to say with death. According to tarot, death represents transformation and transition in one's life, right? When the card comes up in a reading, it means that there's a transformation or transition in someone's life. And so anytime we make a transition in our life, that is the death of an old life and a step into a new life. And death was walking with us during this transition. That same can be said when we transform ourselves as beings. We're not the same person we are now as when we were teenagers, right? We're completely different people now than when we were teenagers or children. And we're not the same people when we're married as when we're single. So there are these moments of death that we all pass through, these thresholds, and it is a death of some sort and a rebirth of a new beginning. And so, according to the tarot, death is simply the beginning of something new. And tarot is a collection of archetypes, right? Archetypes that we see in life. And according to the tarot, death is the beginning of the ascent of the hero's journey. Which means in order to rise up as a hero. In order to become superhuman, one must go through the death process of losing everything he or she has ever known in order to gain the strength, wisdom, and power required to become a superhuman hero. Now, death is also the key of deliverance. So after our spirit leaves the physical body, it is more free and alive, and it's more available to explore and to be than when it's confined in this physical vessel, right? When we look at ourselves in this physical vessel, it's just a part of our being, but our being expands much greater, right? We are the universe. We are God. We are divine consciousness. We've just come into this vessel and we're still connected to it. And so when our spirit leaves the confinement of this physical body, it is more free and alive. And so death, in that way, is the key of deliverance, and it's also known as the Great Initiator. Now, initiation is the process of becoming twice born, where we willingly let our old life die in order for us to be reborn. And so that is letting our old personality die in order for us to obtain knowledge of our eternal divine self, right? If we're still existing within the limitations of our knowledge, then we are stuck within the parameters of what we know. But if we're able to kind of dismantle everything that we've ever known and open ourselves up to learning something new, then we open ourselves up to all the possibilities and potentialities and are able to gain more knowledge and wisdom and able to open ourselves up to our eternal divine self and then begin a new life from this awareness. And this is all part of that hero's journey. And I think that, the hero's journey is part of the journey of the soul. We all go through these moments of death and rebirth, a moment of transcending who we once were, a moment of expanding our consciousness. And so if we think of death as an evolving expression of growth, it makes sense when we look at the physical body, because the physical body develops and grows by renewal upon the death of cells every single day. Therefore, we can say death is merely change and transformation. So let's take a look at the death card, right? Here is the death card that we see in the classic Rider-Waite tarot deck. I would consider this to be one of the original forms of tarot. And if you could see, death rides in from the west. And if you study the medicine wheel and the wisdom of the four great winds, the west is the wind of change. So as death comes in from the west, he comes in with the winds of change. Now you can see death is here, and he's much larger and more powerful than the humans, right? There's a dead king, there's a Hierophant, there's a woman, probably the queen of the king, and a child. And even the king and the Hierophant and the queen are much smaller than death. So death is much bigger than all of us as humans. And you can see death is also depicted as a skeleton. And if we think about a skeleton, in this image, it represents the true self. It represents the core of our being, the structure upon which the body is built. So it is the core true self, that which everything else forms around. And the skeleton is the toughest part of the body. Even after the body decays and returns to the earth, the skeleton still remains. Therefore, the skeleton represents our eternal self that is always there and remains even after the earth has reclaimed our body. Now, according to West African shamanism, all of the world's wisdom is stored within the mineral kingdom, and our bones are the minerals of the body that holds all of the information of our entire being, such as our entire genetic code to create a human being, as well as the wisdom of our entire ancestral lineage since the beginning of time. It's all woven within the DNA and the structure of our being. And so, according to West African shamanic traditions, the bones hold all of this essence and information about who we are. And that is represented in this depiction in the Death Tarot card. Now, the skeleton in this card is us. It is our true self. And when it comes to us, it is saying that it is time for change. And when, just in our real life, when we feel like death, such as we're depressed and we don't want to live anymore, we don't want to do anything, this emotion is a messenger saying that it is time to make some changes. And we can run from these changes. We can avoid this message. We can avoid it through drowning ourselves in alcohol or drugs or whatever escape that we choose, whatever vice that we choose. But the message will only get louder and louder. And so when that feeling of death or depression, that heaviness is looming over us, it is death riding in on the west winds saying it's time to make a change. You can avoid this change, but it's only going to get worse and worse. The message is only going to get louder and louder until we get the memo. So death is nothing to be afraid of, but rather it is a loving and helpful guide and teacher for us. So also, if we look at this card, there is the energy of 5, right? Here's this white rose as 5 petals. There's also 5 petals out here, and then there's these 5 petals there. There's 5 characters. There's death, there's the king, there's the Hierophant, the queen, and the child. So it has this energy of 5. And 5 signifies change. It signifies freedom, challenges, creativity, adventure, and exploration of the unknown. And all of this is all woven within the essence of death and this phenomenon of death. And also wrapped in with number 5 is the 5th element of life, right? There's the 4 building blocks of life, the 4 elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. And those create life, but there's this 5th element, the spirit of life, which unites these 4 elements, these 4 building blocks of life, and is the source of all living forms. And then the white rose represents our superconscious, our pure spirit. And the white horse represents our connection with our superconscious and our pure spirit. And yeah, it's quite fascinating when we look at this picture, because we could just look at this picture, but then once we start to look at it, things start to speak out to us. Another thing that I see is this rising sun in the east, which represents rebirth. So every single day, every single breath, we have an opportunity to be reborn. Another thing that we see here is the river of life. And this is the stream of consciousness that is flowing towards the east. The boat is traveling towards the sun, which represents the source of all light. And this is the depiction of our journey back to source of all life, back to unity consciousness, back to oneness, back to God. And the boat represents the human experience as we travel through the river of life, the river of consciousness, towards the oneness. And I think just looking at the death card, there is so much that we can learn from the death card. And if you see anything else in the death card, I'd love to hear from you. What do you see in this card, and what wisdom do you pick up when you look at the death card? So, after learning about what death is and taking a look at the difference between life and death, and taking a look at the wisdom that tarot can teach us about death, what else can we learn? What other wisdom does death have for us? So, death is a guide for us, and death is always present and guides us through all matters of any transition or transformation or change or movements in our life, right? Like when I decided to move from Philadelphia to Florida, there was a death of my old life in Philadelphia and a rebirth of my new life in Florida. And there was a process of that transition from living and having a life in Philadelphia to moving and creating a life in Florida. And so death walked with me through that entire transition. And death is always walking with us in life through every change and transformation and movement in our life. And once we look at it that way, we begin to understand that perpetual change is the root of everything, and it's the flow of life. And death is a beloved spirit guide for us and holds a lot of wisdom for us as we navigate through these junctures in our life. And on our journey of the soul, there are many types of death, and when death appears, we must be willing to surrender to the process of transformation, because fighting and resisting change will only make things more difficult. Now, transformation requires both death and rebirth, and that's why both are depicted on the card, right? We have death and rebirth with the rising sun. And so the two go hand in hand. There's no final death. There is only a transition, right? Physics tells us energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So there's only a transformation. And death is our guide through that transformation. Now, death is also known as the child of the great transformer. And death is transcendence. It is liberation. It is acceptance, right? We have to be able to accept it. We can't run from it or fight from it. I mean, we have the free will to, but the teachings come along with that. And death is represented by Scorpio. It's also represented by Mars, water, and the 8th house, the house of death. So let's take a look at those components. Let's start with Scorpio. Now, Scorpio is a fixed water sign, and it's ruled by Mars. And there are 3 stages of Scorpio. Scorpio, as most of us know it, starts out as a scorpion who lashes out at change and feels threatened, oftentimes stinging itself. So whenever a Scorpio feels threatened, it lashes out. And whenever we lash out, we tend to only hurt ourselves, right? Because we may lash out at someone else, but we are part of this whole, this oneness. And so when we hurt someone else, we are, in essence, hurting ourselves. And then that takes that death of the scorpion to its next phase in life, which is the snake. And so the scorpion is reborn as a snake, and here in this form, we learn that we must shed our old skin in order to emerge into our new identity. And the cool thing about snakes is, I used to not like snakes. They're kind of creepy crawly for me, and I'm like, why don't you have legs? It's weird. But I've learned to love snakes because until the day they die, they continue to grow and shed their skin. And that is so admirable. I just love that quality of the snake. It never continues to stop growing, right? A human will stop growing and at some point start to deteriorate and get smaller, but a snake, physically, right? But a snake will always continue to grow. And the snake spirit is always growing and learning and evolving with Mother Nature. And imagine experiencing the world in such an intimate way that you don't have a limb to kind of give you space from the world. You are experiencing the world with your entire being and all of those sensory receptors, and moving through the world with your entire being is quite an amazing phenomenon to kind of wrap your mind around. And so I have a lot of admiration for the wisdom that snake can teach us. And so in the next phase or incarnation of Scorpio, the snake turns into an eagle or a phoenix. And this represents the higher perspective that is needed to become more of who we are, to really understand our true essence, our true divine self of who we are before we were born into this physical vessel and shaped by our human experiences. And the eagle is one of those, is one of the animals that can reach the highest height of any other animal in the animal kingdom. And so it has this ultimate perspective on the world below, and is said to be the bridge between the spirit world and the physical world, as well as the phoenix. The phoenix is the bird who died and rose from the ashes to be reborn. And so both of those are depicted in the evolution of Scorpio. And understanding Scorpio and Scorpio's process of rebirth can really give us some wisdom on what death is and how we can work with death and the wisdom of these power animals within our life. It's interesting, my next topic to talk about is water, and I felt myself needing some water. So, as we know, Scorpio is a fixed water sign, and water represents death, because water is this pure, intense, spiritual awakening. It's this flow of life. It's this perpetual change and movement, right? Like, water doesn't like to stand still. It doesn't like to be contained in a vessel. It likes to move. It likes to flow. That's why we have streams and rivers, and that's why the ocean dances with its waves. Water is constantly moving and flowing, and death is that part of life. It's that flow. It's that movement. And so that is represented in the element of water, and that perpetual change and movement that we experience throughout our entire existence. And, water may represent death, or rather, death is represented by water, but water also bears life. And so does death. It bears a rebirth, a new life, a new beginning. So the death archetype appears throughout every transition in our life, some of which I've mentioned. Some can be a loss of a loved one, a divorce, a breakup, a job loss, a death of an old personality or life. Whenever we lose something, we experience a sense of loss and grief, which is a natural expression. It's a natural feeling. And it is death who helps us navigate through these emotions and through this grieving process if we allow ourselves to feel these deep emotions. These are some of the deepest, most beautiful, pure emotions that we can ever experience in our life. And death is here to guide us through these transitions. As I was writing this class and creating this course, there were a lot of very intense emotions that came up for me because we all experience death. I've lost loved ones, and I'm going to get into the story of one, and it always brings up these very strong, palpable emotions, and they're just feelings. We can be scared of these feelings or get lost in these feelings, but they are just feelings. They are just emotions, energy in motion, and I find them very beautiful. So I invite you to allow death to guide you in these emotional periods in your life, in the process of grieving, because that is what death is here to help us with. And whenever you've made a decision to make a change in your life, death was there. It was there right next to you. And the more connected we are with death in our life, and the more we evoke its energies, the greater access to the great mystery teachings and wisdoms that we can access about birth, life, and death, and all of the wisdom that's available to us, and how to be more graceful as we transform and transcend ourselves. So death is certainly not something to be afraid of, and it's definitely a great teacher and a great guide for us. And we have lots of guides to help us in these transitions, especially in actual death or a transition from the physical world into the spirit world. In shamanism, these guides are called psychopumps. And psychopumps derives from ancient Greek, and it means guide of souls. And so psychopumps are creatures, beings, spirits, angels, or deities whose responsibility is to escort souls from the physical earth into the spirit world. So begin to think about who are some guides that know a thing or two about death, that know a thing or two about transformation. These can be ancestral spirits that have already crossed over. These can be mythical creatures that can go in and out of the different dimensions of reality. These can be power animals. A very popular psychopump that we all know in modern culture is the Grim Reaper. I think he has a bad rap, but the Grim Reaper is certainly a very popular one that I'm sure you all have heard of. Another popular one would be Starblower or Kokopelli. Some animals that come to mind just off the top of my head, and I'm going to do a bonus video on some animal guides that can help us with death. But just some that come to mind are possum, butterfly, eagle, cat, and of course all of those like majestic cats, the panther, jaguar, tiger, they all know about death. And of course, plants. There's tons of plants that can teach us about death. Deciduous trees or plants that hold the medicine or poison to transition us into the spirit world. You know, all of these beings, all of these essences can be guides and teachers for us. And so these guides in shamanic tradition are called psychopumps, and we'll get more into that in the bonus video. So now that we've explored what death is, and we now have an idea of the various guides that are available to guiding us through this process, let's take a look at the dying process itself. So I'm sure many of us watching this has experienced a death in our life, whether it was a loved one or someone we knew has crossed over, and we all have our own personal experience with death. And we may have our own personal experience with it, but the dying process is the same for everyone. Now, I'm going to break down the steps in a very slow, digestible format, but of course there are sudden deaths, and sudden deaths happen in the same order, but happen in a much quicker time span. So keep that in mind as we're exploring the death process. Now, we all know that life is the incarnation of this physical body, this physical vessel. And this physical body is made up of 5 elements. It is this cosmic dance of the 4 building blocks of life: earth, water, fire, and air. And these 4 building blocks of life is orchestrated and directed by the 5th element, which is our consciousness of the soul. And so let's think about that, right? We are definitely earth. We were born from the earth. We didn't come from anywhere else. We were born from our mother and created from our mother and father, who were already on this earth, who came to being on this earth from their mother and father and their mother and father. And this cycle of life is continuated by consuming earth, right? By consuming vegetables and fruits and plants and herbs and animals that are of this earth. And so we come from this earth and sustain this life with earth. And of course, that is not enough to sustain life. We have to drink water too, right? Our bodies are 70% water. So water is an essential component to life. We can actually go longer without consuming food of the earth than we can with going without water. So we are as much water as we are earth. And then we are also fire, right? We are this life force energy. There's this heat in our body that we generate. There's this passion that we embody. And there's this element of transformation that fire also burns within us. And then, of course, we breathe. We need this constant recirculation of air, and so we are this breath, this rhythm of life force energy that comes in and circulates through the body, and then when it's done, it exhales. And so there's this cosmic dance of these 4 elements that is kind of directed and facilitated by this soul, this consciousness. And as we begin to die, as we go through and walk through this death process, the body begins to slow down and to age. And the first element to start leaving the body is earth. And we see this because the body begins to shrink, right? As we age, the body begins to shrink. Old people tend to be hunched over and they're much smaller as they get older as they are when they are more youthful and alive. And that's because the bones begin to deteriorate, the body begins to lose its mass and its elasticity, and this is the earth leaving the body. And it's the first element that is that signifies that death is getting closer and closer. And water is the next element that begins to leave the body, right? So the eyes, the skin, the hair all begins to dehydrate. There's less fluidity and flexibility in the body. The body becomes more stiff. And so when we see water begin to leave the body, our body begins to be more dehydrated and stiff and less flexible. We're getting closer to the death process. And fire is the third element to leave the body. And when fire leaves the body, there's this dramatic loss of energy, right? We no longer have the energy that we used to have when we were in our youth. And the hands and our feet begin to become cold. And if you've ever been with someone who is approaching death, that heat begins to leave their body and they just can't keep warm. And that is the fire leaving the body. And so once earth, water, and fire have begun the process of leaving the body might respond by trying to rally up for more life and vitality out of fear of death, but this only increases the process. And in the late stages of death, the intellect and the mind begin to separate from each other, right? The logical intellect begins to die with the physical body, and then the spirit and the soul will become more connected to source, to the oneness, to the universe, and begin to reach out for old connections of deceased loved ones and their ancestors and their spirit guides. And if anyone has been with someone who has gone through this transition, I'm sure you've experienced this. So I'll share a very personal experience of when I was privileged to experience this transition with my great-grandma. I received a phone call from my mom telling me that my great-grandma didn't have much to live and that I should come home and say goodbye to her. And at that time in my life, I was in my 20s, my young 20s, and I was living in Penn State, and my family was living in the Philadelphia area, and there was about 3.5 hour drive from Penn State to Philadelphia, and I immediately hopped in the car and drove to my grandmom's house where my great-grandmother was in her bed, her deathbed, and my whole family was there. I'm going to get a little emotional, right? These beautiful emotions that come up when we dance with death. My grandmom was there, my grandpa was there, my aunt and uncle, my mom, my dad, me, my brothers. We were all there in bed with her, holding her as she was making this transition from the physical world into the spirit world. And as she was beginning to die, she was telling us that her mom and dad were there in the room, all of her brothers and sisters were there, all of her children that have passed were all there, and she was seeing all of these, her beautiful family was in the room with her, and there we can see that the logical mind has is beginning to leave with the body, because the logical mind would say, that's not possible. I don't see them. They're not there. And so that logical mind, that logical thinking begins to sever, and the spirit begins to reach out. And with this first-hand experience, I saw my great-grandma reaching out. She knew she was transitioning out of this physical body and transitioning back home, and she was calling out for her loved ones, her mom, her dad, her brothers and sisters, and her children, and they were all there in this room with her, and she was telling us about all of the beautiful people that were in this room. And so as we begin to die and go through this process, we begin to expand out of this physical container, this physical vessel, and expand into the spirit world and call out for our loved ones. And this is a clear sign that death is right around the corner, and air is the last thing to leave the body. It is the last thing that we receive as birth, and it's the last thing that we let go of in death. And in this dying process, breathing will get more difficult. It'll become more spread out, and it'll begin to rattle and shake. As my great-grandma was dying, her breath was raspy and rattling until her last breath. And you could feel her spirit just leave the body, and the body was no longer alive. Her spirit had gone, and the body was dead. And it died upon that last breath. And once the breath has left the body, the spirit will begin to leave the body. And this entire process of transitioning from life to death is completely painless. And during this process, the spirit is met with all of the loved ones and spirit guides, because absolutely no one ever dies alone. And I was so privileged to have this experience, not only with my great-grandma, but as well as my grandma. And experience that, we don't die alone. That we are surrounded with our loved ones in this transition, and there is no pain. As we are transitioning into death, we know that we are passing through this threshold. And so the physical body has a shut-off valve, and there is no pain. It shuts that pain receptor off because it knows that it is dying. And in this painless transition, the spirit is now open and free to leave the body, because the body is severing that tie with the spirit, or rather the spirit is severing the tie with the body. And this transition is prepared months and years in advance. And in fact, the day and the moment we die is written in divine timing before we were even born. And the spirit may take up to 3 days to leave the body, right? Clearly the body has already died, but the spirit may linger around its body. It may linger around its home, their relatives, their cherished belongings, their favorite places, and it's doing its final work. It's getting closure, and there are, as we transition from one state of being into a new state of being, there is this grieving process. There is this these emotional processes that we have to experience. And so the soul goes through this experience and may linger around the body or the home or relatives, and for days after it has already left the body. And once they have finished their affairs on the earth plane, they will return to their soul groups in the land of the ancestors, also known as the astral realms or the spirit world, right? We're all born from these soul groups, and these soul groups are part of the spirit world, and the spirit world is part of this oneness, this universe, this this God consciousness, this all-knowing consciousness. And we return back to this, our soul group, back to the land of our ancestors, back to the spirit world, back to this oneness. And once in the spirit world, we complete a life review, of which we review our lifetime on Earth. And in the spirit world, our lifetime on Earth may be decades. It may be 100 years or more. But in the spirit world, it's an instant. It's a blink of an eye. So we go through this life review, taking a look at all of the experiences that we have learned in life, because that is what life is, right? Life is this temporary experience of separating ourselves from this oneness and experiencing life as an artist, as a creator of physical matter in this world, this magical physical world of matter. And once we've finished having the experiences in this lifetime, we return back to this oneness to review all of that we learned, all of that which we experienced. And that is part of this life review. And according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there are 3 primary experiences after death. So the first thing once we die is we return to this clear light of source, this oneness, the source of everything and all things. And if we have completed our journey of the soul and learned everything there is to learn, we have the option to step out of the cycle of reincarnation and return to the liberation of oneness. And if we haven't learned everything there is to learn, or we're not ready to step out of the cycle of reincarnation, we have the option to be reincarnated. And this is all according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so that leads us to the second experience. And the second experience is, if you've not completed your journey of the soul, you begin to explore the various archetypes that which you can be born into. And according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there are 6 archetypes that we can be born into. And so there is this process of exploring, okay, now that I have returned back to this oneness, I've returned home, and I've had this life review, what do I want to experience in my next life? What archetype of life do I want to be born into? And that leads us to the third experience, which is this life review that is a little bit more in depth. And it involves the experiences and lessons that you still need to experience. And this is also making a decision on which realm, which space, which place, which time, which culture that you want to be born in. It's a decision of all the details that are needed for when and where and who you want to be born as, and from which womb of creation you would like to be born from. So you're also, in this third experience, you are picking your mother and your father. And that leads me to the next thing, which is the divine union of the three lineages that we come from. And we're really going to explore this in my other class, the Discovering Your Ancestral Blueprint. And so we are a divine union of three lineages, our mother's lineage and our father's lineage, that comes together to create us. But there's also this third lineage, which is the spirit lineage, this unique lineage of the spirit or the soul that has many different fathers and mothers, and may come from other places. And so we are this union of these three lineages. And if you want more insight into, what wisdom does our ancestral lineage have for us, our mother's ancestry, our father's ancestry, since the beginning of time, and then our spirit lineage, then I suggest Discovering Your Ancestral Blueprint and taking a look at that class, because there we will explore this ancestral matrix that we were born into and what wisdom teachings that it holds for us, and uncovering our divine life purpose. So that is all that I have for you on death. We've explored what death is. We've explored the different perspectives on death, the difference between modern material science and different cultures and their perspectives on death. We've taken a look at the difference between life and death. We've taken a look at the wisdom teachings that tarot has for us, and all the wisdom teachings that are hidden within the death card and its imagery. We've taken a look at guides that can guide us through the death and death experience. Scorpio, Scorpion, Snake, Eagle, Phoenix. We've taken a look at psychopumps. We've taken a look at the process of dying, what that process looks like. And we've taken a look at the wisdom of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so what does the experiences that we have look like after we transition through death? What awaits us in the afterlife? And so we've navigated through a lot of different avenues that all encompass this magical phenomenon that we call death. And hopefully after exploring death and learning more about it, we can now have more confidence and courage to walk with death in our life and invite death through every change and transformation that we experience in our life. And I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys enjoyed this class as much as I enjoyed writing and creating this class. And if your appetite is still hungry for more, I have a bonus video that is a deeper glimpse into psychopumps and other spirit guides that we have for death. So be sure to check out that bonus video. And until next time, bye guys.